what is INA 245K? Today in our Immigration Answer series, we're going to break it down and help you understand it. I'm Sam Shihab.
I'm Brian Burke.
And we're from the law firm of Sam Shihab and Associates. And Brian, INA 245K, a wonderful little law that helps you be forgiven for certain lapses in your status if you are filing an employment-based adjustment of status.
Correct. So the general rule of thumb is if you're applying for adjustment of status in the United States, you must have always maintained your non-immigrant status and always worked with authorization in the United States. But INA 245K gives you a lot of help for employment-based applicants. What it does, it says, we don't care about status violations, status lapses during prior visits to the United States, and also on their present stay in the United States, we'll give you up to 180 days of forgiveness for immigration lapses.
So if you have left the U.S. and re-entered on a new non-immigrant visa, H-1B or F-1, whatever, the prior lapses in status in the prior stay in the U.S. are irrelevant.
Correct.
So you enter the U.S., every time you enter the United States, you get fresh 180 days of lapses in status. Yeah. And these lapses in status comes in the context of forgiveness when you file the employment-based adjustment of status.
Yeah, and so let's talk about specifically what it covers. It talks about, failure to maintain your status. So that's like having a gap in your I-94. Engaging in unauthorized employment, which is what it is, or violating the terms and conditions of your status. So that's like not going to full-time classes as a student or, not working as an H-1B worker.
Right. You drop to part-time.
Yeah, part-time.
Without a good reason, and the H-1B is full-time, or there is the I-94 is expired, and then you renewed your H-1B, but it wasn't picked up by USCIS. Now you're adjusting. There's a gap. Yeah. If all that time added up is less than 180 days since your last entry, your application will move forward and you'll be forgiven.
Yeah. So let's talk about how they calculate that 180 days more specifically. So basically, any of those status lapse events, with a day without a 994, unauthorized employment, or failure to maintain your status, if any of those things happen on a day, they count that day, and if multiple events like those happen on a day, they'll count that as one day.
So if you are without an I-94 and have worked on that day, these are two violations. One, work without authorization. The other one is status lapse in status. Together occurring on one day, that's a 1 day out of the 180 days.
Yeah. They count these days, they're very generous in the way they count this. They count them honestly. It's one bad day doesn't turn into 2 bad days or 3 bad days for multiple violations on that day.
However, if you've worked 30 days without authorization, and within that 30-day block, there were weekends that you didn't work, and there were some holidays, USCIS will count 30 days.
Yeah, and they really kind of think in terms of continuity of employment or the existence of employer-employee relationship. If they come at you, saying, well, we've got you for 30 days right here, and you say, I didn't work weekends, they're not going to really want to entertain that argument.
Yes. So that's how they count it, and it's very important to understand how they count it because it can make a big difference.
Yeah, you can really, when you think you have an immigration crisis, if you talk to somebody about INA 245K, you can make it clear that maybe you don't have an issue.
Once you file your adjustment of status, USCIS, employment-based adjustment status, USCIS looks as of the date of the filing back, so from your admission into the United States, last admission, into the adjustment status filing, and they look at whether or not you have less than 180 days or less of lapses in status. Yeah. Any lapses in status that occur after,
it's really only employment authorization violations that are lapses that are possible after the case is filed.
And how do they count?
They would count as one day at a time after the case is filed. Now, one thing we have to make clear, Sam, is we talked about admission pursuant to an H-1B or L, a non-immigrant visa. What we have to make clear is that admission coming to the United States on an advanced parole does not work for the purposes of INA 245K. It does not reset the time frame.
So if your last entry to the United States is on advanced parole, USCIS would look at the prior entry and add all these lapses together, because an entry on advanced parole is not considered an admission, a legal admission, and therefore they look at the prior entry and adds it up. And one of the disadvantages of using advanced parole is that it does not
You
reset
don't
the
get a
clock
benefit. Yeah, exactly.
on the 180 days going forward.
Since we are talking about, potentially some serious immigration lapses, and we are talking about travel, one thing that should be noted is that INA 245K cannot protect you from fraud or misrepresentation. So we've explained that, travel abroad pursuant to a non-immigrant visa can reset the clock. But one thing you have to be very careful with is that if you go to the consulate and apply for a visa and they ask you if you've ever violated your status, if they ask you for, have you ever worked without authorization or violated the terms and conditions of your visa, you have to answer honestly. If you lie to the consulate, for example, INA 245K won't protect you on that.
Will not clear that one.
Yeah.
You have to be honest with the consulate in your application because there's a completely different violation that's outside
the scope of 245K.
What 245K is really is about. Okay, so that's what INA 245K is. Hopefully that's helpful to you. You guys have a great day from the law firm of Sam Shihab and Associates.